He walked into the building with a polished resume, years of experience and quiet confidence. But before he even spoke, something shifted. Eyes glanced past him. His presence felt dismissed, reduced, overlooked. What should have been an opportunity slowly turned into something else. Something colder, something familiar. He wasn't judged by his skills, but by something he couldn't control. And as the minutes passed, it became clear this wasn't just another interview. What they didn't know was that this moment wouldn't define him. It would expose them. He had spent years building himself quietly, piece by piece, far from the spotlight. Long nights studying, early mornings working, and countless moments where he had to prove more, do more, just to be seen as equal. It wasn't something new to him. It was a pattern he had learned to navigate without complaint. Still, he believed in the process. He believed that effort would eventually speak louder than anything else. This interview was supposed to be different. A real opportunity. A chance to step into a space he had earned through discipline and persistence. As he walked into the corporate building that morning, everything felt within reach. The polished floors, the quiet conversations, the steady rhythm of ambition. It all reflected the future he had been working toward. But almost immediately, something fell off. It was subtle at first. A hesitation in acknowledgement. A delay that didn't quite make sense. He noticed how others were welcomed with ease, while his presence seemed to create an unspoken pause. Nothing direct, nothing obvious, just enough to make him question what was really happening. He stayed composed, as he always did. Years of experience had taught him how to read these moments without reacting. But deep down, a familiar tension began to rise, the kind that didn't come from uncertainty, but from recognition. Because this wasn't the first time. And as he sat there, waiting longer than expected, watching others move ahead, one thought quietly settled in. This opportunity might not be what it seemed. He sat there longer than anyone else. At first, it seemed like a scheduling delay. Interviews ran late all the time. But as the minutes stretched, the pattern became impossible to ignore. One by one, candidates who had arrived after him were called in. They walked past him with polite smiles, some nervous, some confident, but all acknowledged, all seen. He remained. The room slowly emptied, and the quiet began to feel heavier. Every passing second carried a message that no one was saying out loud. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was controlled, subtle, the kind of exclusion that hides behind professionalism, making it harder to confront but impossible to mistake. Eventually, someone approached him. A glance, a measured tone, just enough to keep things formal, but distant enough to remind him where he stood. There was no apology for the delay, no urgency to correct it, just a quiet redirection that felt less like procedure and more like dismissal. Still, he stayed composed. Years of navigating spaces like this had taught him one thing: never react too quickly, never give them a reason to define the narrative. So he adjusted his posture, steadied his breathing, and waited. Because leaving would mean accepting something he wasn't willing to accept. Not today. When he was finally called in, the energy shifted, but not in the way he had hoped. The room felt colder. The attention wasn't focused, it was measured, evaluated in a way that went beyond his qualifications. Every detail seemed to be observed, but not for the reasons that mattered. His experience, his preparation, his achievements, none of it carried the weight it should have. Instead, there was hesitation, subtle interruptions, pauses that lingered just a second too long, a lack of engagement that made it clear he wasn't being considered the same way as the others. It wasn't about what he said. It was about how he was being received, and he could feel it, that quiet resistance, that unspoken doubt, the kind that doesn't come from logic but from bias. The kind that forces someone to work twice as hard just to be seen as equal. Still, he didn't break. He answered every question with precision. He held his composure. He gave them no excuse, no opening to justify what was happening. But deep down, something was shifting. Not frustration, not anger, clarity. Because this wasn't an isolated moment. It was a pattern, a system that operated quietly, denying without denying. Rejecting without saying the word. And sitting there, in that room, he realized something important. This interview was never really about him. It was about them. And as the meeting came to an end, there was no sense of closure. No clear outcome. Just a polite dismissal wrapped in professionalism. The kind that sounds respectful, but feels empty. He walked out the same way he came in, calm, controlled, unreadable. But this time, something had changed. Because while they believed this was the end of the story, they had no idea it was only the beginning. Days passed with no response. No reaction, no follow-up, just silence, the kind that confirms what no one wants to say out loud. Life moved forward, but that moment stayed with him. Not because it was new, but because it was familiar in a way that was impossible to ignore. And then, everything shifted. In a quiet boardroom, far from that waiting area, a decision was being made. Numbers were discussed. Performance was questioned. Leadership was evaluated. The same company that had dismissed him without a second thought was now facing something it hadn't prepared for. A change. Documents were signed. Control was transferred. Power moved quietly, without announcement, without warning. And at the center of it all was him, the same man they had overlooked, the same man they had made wait, the same man they never truly saw. When he walked back into that building, nothing about him had changed, but everything about the room had. The same polished floors, the same walls. But this time, the silence felt different. He wasn't waiting anymore. They were. The realization spread slowly. Confusion first, then disbelief. Faces that once carried indifference now struggled to process what was happening. The power they thought they held was gone. And in that moment, the truth became undeniable. This was never about qualifications, never about experience. It was about perception, assumptions made without thought, judgments passed without reason. But now, those same assumptions were standing face to face with reality, and there was nowhere left to look away. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't seek revenge, and he didn't need to prove anything anymore, because the truth had already done that for him. In the days that followed, the building changed, but not because of policies written on paper. It changed because people were forced to confront something they had always been able to ignore. The quiet glances, the delayed acknowledgments, the subtle dismissals. Things that once went unnoticed were now impossible to hide. Decisions were made, not out of anger, but out of accountability. Systems were reviewed. Standards were redefined, not to create sympathy, but to restore fairness. And through it all, he remained the same, calm, composed, and focused, not driven by what happened to him, but by what should never happen again. Because for him, this was never just personal. It was a reflection of something bigger, a pattern that exists in rooms people don't question, in moments people don't challenge, in decisions people justify without thinking twice. The kind of bias that doesn't always shout, but whispers just loud enough to shape outcomes. He could have walked away that day. He could have accepted the silence, the delay, the quiet rejection. But he didn't. And because he stayed, because he endured, the truth had nowhere left to hide. But here's the reality. Not everyone gets that moment. Not everyone gets to walk back into the same room with power. Most are left with the memory of what they felt and no way to change what happened. So the question isn't just about what he overcame. It's about how many others are still sitting in that waiting room, being overlooked, unheard, unseen, while the world carries on like nothing is wrong. And maybe the real change doesn't start in moments of power. Maybe it starts in the moments we choose to see what we've been taught to ignore. He walked into the interview fully qualified, but was quietly ignored, overlooked, and made to feel like he didn't belong, until the moment they realized he was the one who now owned everything they once denied him. After watching this powerful story unfold, and see how one moment of silent injustice turned into a truth no one could ignore. If this story made you feel something, don't stay silent. Comment your thoughts, and subscribe to be part of a conversation that matters. Stories like this need to be seen, heard, and shared.